Hello everyone! You are on the Film Fables channel, and today I will tell you about the film Blue Lagoon. But first, I ask you to like and subscribe. At the beginning of the film, a ship is sailing. Richard and Emmeline are sitting on the very edge of the ship, and their uncle Arthur comes out. He tells Richard not to put himself or Emmeline in danger anymore. He wants them to get to France alive. Richard asks if their parents will be there, and Arthur says no. Emmeline says that if someone has gone to heaven, they will no longer be around. Later, Richard notices the shark and says he would like to catch it, and the cook would cook it. After that, Richard, exploring the ship, finds photos of Patty's cook, which contains naked girls. Emmeline is surprised and Patty notices them. He wants to punish them, but someone on the ship shouts fire. Patty saves Richard and Emily. He puts them on a boat with him and leaves the ship. Their uncle is sailing away on another boat. Patty tries to find their uncle, but because of the fog, they are moving further away from each other. The next day, Patty notices a lot of things from the ship, and also a chest that has things in it, but no food. He finds old canned goods. Richard asks him if he is a pirate, to which Patty remains silent. Later, Richard says that they are thirsty, but Patty distracts their attention with the sunset, saying that soon the water will start hissing because of the setting sun. The next day, Emmeline says she smells flowers and Patty notices the island. They swim to it, and Richard asks, "Where are we?" Patty replies that he is in heaven. He says that now they don't have any jobs and bosses, but only fruits and freedom. He finds a waterfall and bananas and treats the children. While swimming in the water, Emmeline notices the barrel, saying that it has the same smell as the captain. Patty discovers the rum. After that, Richard brings the skull and says that he has found a strange thing with 2 holes. Patty immediately says it's time for them to go. Later, Patty notices how Emmeline wants to taste the berries, but he scolds her and makes her spit them out, saying that if she eats them, she will fall asleep forever. This evening, Richard and Emmeline talk about how they had a cat that also fell asleep and never woke up. The next day, Richard looks at photos of happy people and their children. He asks Patty if he has children, and Patty says he has them in almost every port. There are about 17 of them. Later, Richard and Emmeline run away from Patty, and he screams for them to finally undress and swim, but they don't want to go naked. For a while, all 3 of them live on the island, and together they build a house for themselves, and Patty makes a ship for Richard. After that, Richard and Emmeline swim naked in the sea and later run away from Patty again, but now they no longer want to get dressed. One day, Patty, in search of food, finds a ritual place and a stone on which he sees fresh meat. He runs home and tells Richard and Emmeline never to go to another part of the island. He asks if they know what the law is and says it will be their law. He tells them that there is a boogeyman on the other side of the island who eats cute kids like them. That night, Patty gets drunk on rum again, and everyone dances together. Emmeline says Patty is very funny when he drinks from this keg. In the morning, Patty takes a keg and sails away. And in the morning, Richard finds Patty on the other side. The children swim to him and realize that Patty has fallen asleep forever. Emmeline asks Richard to get out of this place, and they sail to the other shore. Richard and Emmeline have been living on this shore for a while. They also swim naked in the sea and build new homes for themselves. After a while, Richard and Emmeline become adults. Richard collects the pearls and tells Emmeline that he saw Santa Claus, who brought them gifts. He shows the girl the deer tracks, and they notice that there is something in the stockings. They find pearls in them, but Richard doesn't know what it's called. They laugh and jostle. Richard asks why we fight all the time. Emmeline says she doesn't know, but she began to have strange thoughts about Richard and them together. The next day, Richard goes fishing, and Emmeline went swimming in the gorge. Suddenly, she notices blood under her and calls for help, but she understands that she is safe. When Richard comes running, she chases him away and tells him not to look at her. Later, Richard wants to help Emmeline and look at the wound. He says that blood flows if a person is injured, but Emmeline tells him not to touch her. Richard gets angry and says it's not fair. She's hiding something from him, and he's telling her the whole truth. After that, Richard builds a new raft, and Emmeline looks at it. He asks, "What happened?" Emmeline says his muscles. Richard doesn't understand anything and says that she has been acting strangely lately, constantly looking at him and saying some stupid things. He thinks she's sick. In the evening, they sit on the shore and watch the sunset. Richard asks where Emily's parents are, and she says they are in heaven. Richard asks if Emmeline thinks about Patty and what happened to him, but Emmeline doesn't want to talk about it and leaves. Later, Richard roasts the fish and says he has a lot of questions. I wish there was a book that would answer all these questions. When they have dinner, Emmeline tries to distract Richard and is fooling around. They hear some strange sound and think that maybe it's a boogeyman. The next day, Richard plays his instrument and Emmeline asks him to stop because he knows how angry it makes her. But Richard deliberately continues. She pokes him with a spear and parodies Richard, and then they catch up with each other. On the beach, Richard sits on top of Emily and makes her say that he is the best. That evening, Richard leaves the house and sees Emmeline basking in the sea naked. He also jumps into the sea. They swim in the beautiful night water. The next day, Emmeline goes to the other side of the island and finds the ritual place Patty was talking about. She notices blood there and runs away. After telling Richard everything, he scolds her, saying that she broke the law. But Emmeline says that maybe there is a God there who can help them. When Emmeline falls asleep, she has a nightmare in which Richard eats berries and then abandons her. When she wakes up, she calls Richard and asks him never to leave her. After that, they kiss. Richard tries to do something, but Emmeline stops him and tells him not to do it. That night, Richard looks at Emily. He touches her, smells her hair, and when Emmeline wakes up, she shoos him away. The next morning, Richard leaves and purposely ignores Emily. She finds him on the beach and sees Richard twitching his arm. He chases her away and says he's tired of her. Later, Richard collects coconuts and sees a passing ship. He runs to light a fire, but Emmeline notices the ship and, looking towards the fire, just sits down on the ground. When Richard arrives, he scolds Emmeline and says that he has stopped understanding her at all. She's acting strangely and missed the ship. He launches the raft into the water and says that he will go home alone. When Richard sails away from the shore, his raft collapses and Emmeline laughs at him. She says he's a loser and they'll never sail off this island, it's their home. To which Richard replies that he doesn't want to live with her all his life. She laughs at him and she has secrets. Emmeline says he's not perfect either. She saw Richard satisfying himself on the beach. She's going to tell his father everything if he comes. Richard accuses her of peeping. Emmeline says that he also constantly looks at her breasts. Richard laughs at Emmeline and she throws a coconut at his head. When she apologizes to him, he slaps her and leaves. After that, Richard throws away all of Emmeline's things and says he will live alone. They live separately for a while, but one day Emmeline steps on a fish, which causes her fever to rise. Richard asks what's wrong with her. She asks to be taken to God. Bringing Emmeline to the big head, he tries to remember the prayer, Our Father, but he does not succeed well. After a while, Emmeline gets better. Richard says he was very worried about her. It will be hard for him to live on this island alone. Later, they swim in the sea again and eat fruits. Richard asks her to kiss him and says that he has a strange feeling in his stomach and his heart is beating hard. Emmeline feels the same way. After that, they kiss, laugh and have fun together. This has been going on for a while. But one day Richard notices that Emmeline has started eating nonstop. He says she's going to get fat so soon. The next evening, Richard kisses Emily, but she makes it clear that she does not want to. Richard says that she has not wanted to do this for the second day. Emmeline admits that she is in pain now for some reason. She asks Richard to touch her stomach, and he notices that something is moving there. That night, Richard hears the strange sound of drums again. He goes to the other side of the island and finds savages there who perform a ritual. He runs to Emmeline and sees that she is screaming, sitting under a tree. He doesn't know how to help her, and she gives birth. The next day, the baby cries, and Richard says he must be hungry. Emmeline asks to give him some fruit, but baby refuses. She takes the baby in her arms, and he leans against her chest, to which Emmeline and Richard are surprised. Later, Richard says Patty was right. They shouldn't have gone to the other side of the island. he sharpens spears and prepares for the fact that uninvited guests will come. The next day, he goes to the place where Paddy was last and finds a skeleton there. Richard looks at him and at his body. After that, all three of them have a nice time together. Richard and Emmeline look happy. One day, Emmeline tries to teach a baby to swim and she succeeds. After that, all three swim happily in the sea. After a while, little Paddy grows up. Richard and Emmeline show him the island. Richard teaches Paddy how to hunt, and one day he says the first word. Later, the three of them bathe in mud. At this time, sailors passing by notice people on the island. They tell their captain to check who it is. When the man picks up the spyglass, it turns out that it is their Uncle Arthur who is trying to find them. Richard and Emmeline see the ship, but they behave calmly and smile. He takes her hand and they walk away, and Arthur says it's definitely not them. The next day, Emmeline asks Richard to take her to the place where they once lived with Paddy. They sail to their old house, and Richard finds there the ship that Paddy made for him. Emmeline does not notice how their child collects poisonous berries and puts them in the boat. After that, Emmeline gets into the boat and begins to doze off. She loses her paddle, and when she calls for help, Richard throws himself into the sea. Emmeline spots a shark and throws an oar at it. Climbing into the boat, Richard tries to row, but the current carries them further into the open ocean. They float on the ocean for a while. Richard shows Paddy how the sun is setting and says that soon the water will start hissing. The next morning, Emmeline notices that while they were sleeping, Paddy ate some poisonous berries. She asks Richard for help. He, looking at her, divides the berries in half and gives them to Emmeline. They eat them together and lie down. After a while, the sailor notices the boat. Arthur and his team get into their boat and swim up to them. He notices all three of them and asks, "Are they dead?" To which the sailor replies, "No, they just fell asleep." This is where the film ends. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. There are a lot of interesting and exciting things waiting for you here. See you in the next videos.